All right, what's going on, people? We are back. JV Wins Dogon SS here for another edition of the Conscious Approach channel on YouTube. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. Thanks to everybody who's been subscribing to the channel, following us, following along with us as we continue to crank out this logical content. And if this is the first time that you are seeing what we like to do over here and you appreciate what we have going on, go ahead and hit the subscribe button, like the videos, leave a comment, let us know what you think. Let us know where you think we go wrong. Let us know where you think we go right. Above all else, just let us know what you think. This is kind of a community oriented type channel that we try to foster here. So we appreciate everybody for joining us along for the ride. Please forgive me. I'm kind of playing a little hurt tonight, but we'll get through it. You know, it's all good. I'll thug it out. I can't be the guy that I am without being willing to play through injury. So it is
Yeah,
all good.
yeah,
But
man.
we got some interesting topics to talk about tonight. Very curious to hear what Dogon thinks about these various topics that we got going on tonight, as well as everyone else in the community. So first, we are going to start off with a sports topic. And Tracy McGrady, T Mac, a guy from the millennial generation, I would say, who's a great player in my opinion. Um, Made waves when he said he doesn't look at Steph Curry as top five. And I think he even says that he doesn't even crack the top 10 for him, which is kind of controversial in the sports world because I think most people consider Steph to be at worst top 10. I don't think that it's unfair for me to say that. I think most people at this point, 4 championships, 2 MVPs, and all of the stuff that he's done, they kind of put him in that top 10 range. But not for T Mac. T Mac doesn't really think that Steph is in the top 10 and hear his reasonings for why he says that. So we'll go ahead and provide some context here for why T Mac feels that way.
Hmm.
So this is an article excerpt from Yahoo from an interview that T Mac did on a podcast in which he says that Steph is not a top 10 guy and he's definitely not a top 5 guy. So, why Steph isn't a top 10 NBA player of all time per T Mac? Why Steph isn't a top 10 NBA player of all time per T Mac originally appeared on NBC Sports Bay Area. Steph Curry again was subject to slander. That's a bit harsh. Uh, from a retired NBA player. It's a day that ends in Y, after all. The latest culprit in Naismith Basketball Hall of Famer Tracy McGrady. The 45-year-old left the superstar Warriors guard off his top 10 NBA players of all time list. And he had interesting reasoning for doing so. Here's what McGrady said on Sunday in a video he posted on X. He hasn't cracked my top 10 yet. He just hasn't, McGrady said on Sunday. I think Steph has had a phenomenal career. Obviously, 4 championships, 2 league MVPs, and he has a finals MVP. But if you go back in his career and look at when Draymond is out of the lineup for the season and when Klay Thompson is out for the season or half the season, to me, if you're that great, if you're going to be a top 5 player and one of your guys is missing and you can't make the playoffs, I can't put you in my top 5 or top 10. I just can't. McGrady didn't share his all-time top 10 list in the video. He did, though, list some of Curry's remarkable feats, yet the 7-time NBA All-Star seemed unimpressed. So we'll go ahead and play the video of T-Mac explaining himself when it comes to his belief that Curry is not top 5, nor is he top 10.
Butt Crack Sports says Stephen Curry is a top 5 NBA player of all time.
No, he tripping on that. He hasn't cracked my top 10 yet. He just hasn't. I think Steph has had a phenomenal career. I mean, obviously, 4 championships, 2 league MVPs. He has a final MVP. But if you go back in his career, and if you look at when Draymond is out of the lineup for the season, if you look at Klay Thompson has missed the season or half of that season, to me, if you're that great, if you're going to be a top 5 and one of your guys are missing, you can't make the playoffs, I can't put you in the top 5 or top 10. I just can't. And that's just my opinion. Greatness to me is when one of your guys are out, you still got to elevate your team at least to the playoffs. Like, They don't even make the playoffs when Clay or Draymond is out of the lineups, and they haven't won a play-in game at all. So he top five, no chance.
No chance.
Yeah, right. So he said no chance. So I mean, that all sounds logical and reasonable enough, but do you buy what he's selling? Do you think, based on that logic, Steph isn't top 10 all time or top five?
Yeah, that's legitimate enough. I wouldn't have went in that angle. I really don't do that. Too much of this greatest player of all time list type of thing has too much to deal with being a superhero. Now that is appropriate whenever Clay and or Dre were out, it was a problem, but um yeah, I can't really do that. One could like hindsight and say Jordan never really dealt with any major sustainable injuries to his teammates in one particular Scottie Pippen and or Dennis Rodman. So you can't really fairly make that comparison. Also, Steph plays in the highly competitive West, where he could have snuck in the playoffs in the East if he played in there. Like LeBron did many times as far as running the East.
Mhm.
So I can't really per se go off that logic so much. Me personally, I don't have him in my top 10 due to the fact that, well, it's just 10 players better than him. And it's the same logic that I do anytime anybody wants to do any one of these type of lists. And I can probably, if you want to classify him as a point guard, or we're just doing 10 people positionless, either way, I got 10 people that's better than him. If there's on a point guard list, I got at least 4, 5, 6 people ahead. I don't really have the list, but I can tell you who I would choose over Steph. So now that's not to take anything away from him. There's just been a lot of excellent basketball players. And for one, Steph, if anybody wants to take time to watch his highlights and stuff, you'll be enamored, much like myself. The guy's a phenomenon. So is he in my top 20? Yes. Is he in my top 10? I got to really think about that and crunch some numbers. But top
Yeah,
five, no way, like Tracy McGrady says. Like top five, bro. Like once you start naming names like, Kareem and Wilt and Michael and, if you want to throw Kobe in there and this is already tight. Shaq, this is already tight. That's five already. So I'm not
mhm,
gonna put him over those dudes. I'm sorry. If I'm starting a franchise from scratch and I got prime Shaq, I'm taking Shaq, dude. I don't care if it's prime Steph, because even in prime Steph's heyday, when he was able to hit all these threes, and I guess this is what T Mac was alluding to, you weren't really afraid of him by himself. So if they want to use this criteria itself, it wasn't so much that. My criteria is how good are you as, and I think for Steph, his shooting, as spectacular as it is, it doesn't make up for his lack of defense. It doesn't make up for his lack of being a true point guard as far as like facilitating. Now, that doesn't take away his passing and his selflessness, which I really enjoy. But overall, as a package, I don't think he can hold his own amongst others who had a more complete game. But nevertheless, I still love Steph. And if there was like a team that I wanted to build or stuff like that, he's the type of guy that I would want. There's guys that are on the top 25, top 50 list that I wouldn't even want near my facility.
right.
So there's no taking away from Steph. I love him as a basketball player, and a guy. He's a cool dude. As far as T Mac, I agree with him here, but just off different principles, I would say. But what are your thoughts, man? Do you have Steph in your top five? No, I'm sorry, at least top 10, maybe 15. What are your thoughts?
I agree with the overall premise that he's not top five or top 10, but like you, I look at it for different reasons because yeah, that's a good point that you brought up. Um, I'm pretty familiar with the trajectory of Jordan's career, and throughout their run with their 2 3 peats, they never had to deal with sustained season-ending injuries to key
Correct.
players on the rosters. So
Correct.
that's a very good point. Yet Jordan is still heralded. So that's actually a good point. Um, what makes these conversations goofy sometimes is the criteria.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on who you're talking to, the criteria changes. So you have a lot of people who will formulate these types of ridiculous arbitrary lists based off of like non-basketball stuff, things like impact and influence, you know. And if you want to bring up influence over the game as a factor, I might be willing to entertain the idea that he's top 10.
Mm.
Um, because there's no denying his overall impact. I mean, it is true. Like, I'm not really one to engage in hyperbole or to ride along with a particular wave or media narrative, but
Mm.
I do agree that there was a way that the NBA game was played pre-Steph that is different than the way it's played post-Steph. Like,
Mhm.
he kind of really did usher in this playing from the 3-point line out on both ends of the floor. Like, he was the reason that people started playing like that. Steph was the reason that if it's a 3-on-1 or 3-on-2 fast break, guys aren't going, in guys aren't, headed towards the hoop for the easy dunk or the easy layup. Rather, they're fanning out to the 3-point line so that they can shoot a three, even though no metric suggests that that's a higher percentage shot than getting a dunk or a layup, especially in a fast break situation when you have a clear path to the basket, as long as you know how to pass the ball right. So I do think in terms of impact, you can argue that he's top 10. But impact to me does not get you in the top 5. At best, it gets you in the top 10. And that's only if you value impact as a measurable for how you evaluate these things. Me personally, I don't really value impact all that highly. I'm looking more at career achievement and game. And if I look at career achievement and game, I don't have him in the top 10. He's probably top 15, but I don't have him in the top 10. And for me, it's actually quite simple. Like the way I look at Steph, like don't let's not engage in revisionist history. Prior to when the Warriors won the 2022 NBA Finals, Steph did not really play all that well in the finals. Like if you go back and look at the numbers and if you go back and watch the games, he wasn't really the most impactful player on the Warriors in the three championships that they won before 2022 when they beat the Celtics.
Agreed.
It was KD in the 2 years that they had KD there. And then in 20, I think 15 when they won, it was a collective effort when Steph and Clay and Draymond were all in their prime and they had a bunch of guys coming off the bench, Sean Livingston, Leandro Barbosa, and people like this. So they had a really deep roster full of high IQ guys who could all shoot,
Mm-hmm.
led by Curry, who's the greatest shooter ever. But in the finals, it's not like he was blowing people out of the water. He kind of had a mediocre finals resume leading up to 2022. And it's not all about the finals, but the ultimate goal is win the championship. So you have to factor that into it. And the way I see it is you can't be a top 10 player all time if you can physically take a guy out of the game. And with the exception of 2022, because the Celtics play bad basketball and they play terrible team defense. They play good individual defense, but they play terrible team defense. So they didn't really expose Steph Curry for his physical limitations. But in the 2 years that they won with KD, and in the year that they won in 2015, when everybody on Cleveland got hurt, LeBron was taking Curry out of the series because Curry's just not big enough. And I don't think fundamentally a guy can be a top 10 all-time player if you can say, hey, defensive stopper, guard that guy and take him out of the game. And as great as Steph is, he was being taken out of the game physically in a lot of those finals, except for 2022. And every guy that I look at who's a top 10 player, in my opinion, you can't physically take them out of a series or out of a game. The only way that they can be removed from the equation is if they're just having a bad night shooting, is if they're just in a slump and they're just not playing very effectively offensively.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they can't find the basket. They're making poor decisions in terms of their shot selection. But the point is they take themselves out of the game. You can't necessarily orchestrate a defensive game plan that involves one player sticking this guy and you saying take him out of the game. You can do that with Steph. I mean, he's like 6'3". So he's a great shooter, but size-wise, physicality-wise, If you want to, you can take him out of a series. LeBron did it twice. And in 2015, like I said, it was kind of a collective effort. Now, granted, you have to have the roster to be able to make that happen. But any 6'6" or taller wing player who embraces playing individual defense can limit him in playoff series when the game gets thick and it becomes all about half court execution. So if you can limit a guy along those lines, I fundamentally can't put him in the top 10, as great as he is. Because, off the top of my head, Jordan, Kobe, LeBron, Shaq, obviously, Hakeem Olajuwon, Magic Johnson. You can't physically take them out of a playoff series. Like, you can't do it. The only way that they can be removed from a series is if they take themselves out of it. So for me, if you can physically take somebody out of a series, they can't be top 10 in my opinion, but that's my criteria. And I just saw that too much. Even in years where they made the playoffs but didn't win the championship, there were a lot of games where Steph just kind of got taken out of it, because if you affect him with length and physicality, those 3-point bombs become less frequent. Now, during the regular season, that doesn't apply, because during the regular season, the defense isn't as intense and it's not really about half court execution. I'm talking about in the playoffs when the games matter the most. I saw him often being taken out of the series due to physicality and length on defense. So if you can effectively do that to a guy, in my opinion, they can't be top 10. But that's my criteria. I don't really factor in impact because that's just me personally. I don't really care about that. It's enough to get him top 15, but for me, not top 10. So obviously, if it's not top 10, it's not top 5 either.
No, and that's fair too, because there's been times because I'm a Steph fan, bro. So when they was doing their whole run, when they first got to the finals for the first time, I'm sitting there, I'm ready for this. But even leading up to those finals, just a playoff resume in general, bro. Like he's just a good basketball player. Like he's just really good, and he's a really good teammate. But there was nothing about him that, in my opinion, like you said, it was mediocre. And especially when we're talking about these upper echelon players where these guys were having like mind-blowing performances. I remember the first time as like I saw Jordan do what he did in the 90s. And as a hater at the time and somebody that wants him to lose, I couldn't really feel the feeling of, man, that was awesome. I knew it was awesome, but it was F him at the same time. When we got Wade, and he would go through these stretches in like the fourth quarter or second half of a game where he's just literally unstoppable. It's like he normally misses that, but he's not missing that right now. And then I'll get this feeling of, oh my God, this is amazing. And so as a Steph fan, I'm waiting for that moment of, man, this guy's just tiers above everything. And he always was just muddling around, in my opinion. He would have a spike performance here, a spike performance there, but not even nothing. And I'm being real, bro. Not even anything to the caliber of what Jalen Brunson's doing. And so my thing is I was waiting for those type of performances where this guy is completely unguardable. But as you said, due to whatever you want to say, physicality or what have you, when he got pressed in these moments, his superpower seemed to have went away. So the reason why I like Steph so much is because I think he embodies what I think basketball players should be: is selfless, passing the ball, running around. I think he plays basketball the right way, especially for his frame, because nobody else really makes it like that or reach that echelon like that without being extraordinary to some degree. So with all of those things, I give him all of those credits. And that's why he's up there in 15, 20-ish, 10-ish range. But to put him in 5 is, like I said, once you start naming a few dudes, you start to see how tight that window is. And it's like, look, I'm sorry, I'm taking Kareem. Well, you want me not to take Wilt Chamberlain? And it's like, well, he's the greatest shooter. He changed the game. Yeah, and that impact thing, I'm glad you addressed that impact thing, because I don't even know where that came in. That's like album sales when it comes to rappers. And so it's
they
like
do it. They do it with Iverson too. Like, that whole impact thing. Like, and this is a media thing, but Steph's not the only one to whom such a thing applies. They do it to Iverson, where they will inflate Iverson's perceived value in terms of where he is all time based upon his cultural impact. So, how he dressed and his tattoos and his hairstyle. So, I just don't factor that impact stuff. Personally, I just don't care as much about it.
I don't either. Because if we're playing pickup, I don't care about the best dressed guy out there. I don't care about that. And this is coming from a top tier Iverson fan, by the way. So, as far as like favorite players, Iverson is my favorite player. Now that's not the best. He's my favorite. So I can sit down and I can watch Iverson highlights all the time. And I remember in high school, man, it was you were team Kobe and I'm team Iverson. And I'm doing the same thing where I'm like, yo, whatever with Kobe, man, not appreciating it, whatever with this dude, man. Iverson's the wave. And there was too many times as me, especially growing up and appreciating the game of basketball more, knowing the game of basketball more, I saw where Iverson wasn't really a good team basketball player. And so, in result, and the interviews came out later where he said, "Hey, man, he was in that MJ mode. He thought that that's what he had to be. He thought that he had to be the top scorer, top shot taker, all that good. So he tried to fit into that role, and that's not even really a sustainable thing. Jordan was the first person to be doing that in the first place. So Iverson fell into that little bucket, and with that came bad habits, in my opinion. So I would see him play, get to these high levels, and he couldn't cross over because, well, he to me he wasn't a good team basketball player. And the one thing that Steph does is he's an excellent, and that's a high criteria for me. You need to be a good teammate, and Steph is that, in my opinion. He's a good teammate, but also he also struggles with components of leadership, and he's more of a millennial leader in the sense of, hey man, everything's all good. Follow my example, guys. And it's just like those types of things is why I believe he had his moments of not reaching certain peak levels because he could have had more going on in his career. So overall, I'm not taking anything away from this man. I just don't. I just think that people should appreciate the previous generations a little bit more before they start throwing Steph in there. Younger people, I can completely understand. If I was younger, I would do it. But me, even as a top tier Iverson fan, and I love the dude, I can't even see myself putting him in the top 10. Now, as far as my favorite player, he's number one. But as far as like if I'm building a team, Iverson might not be near my facility. And I'm just keeping it 100, man. The only way he'll be in there is if I just bury him amongst other great teammates. And then he can just learn by proxy. But if we're just taking what their mentality was, how they actually played on the court, I don't know if Iverson could have shared the court with a Kobe is my problem with that. But I know Steph Curry could. So, hey, man, I trust T Mac on this one, and I'm with him. Not top 10, man. And 15, man, not 15, 11 through 20 gets murky. So, catch me on the back end with that one. Well.
Well, yeah, there's no slouch in being, there have
I
been
don't
hundreds
know.
of thousands of NBA players, so there's no slouch
Right.
in being top 15 or top 20. It's all good. That's still a very short list. But yeah, I mean, when you go in the top 10, you almost have to have what I perceive to be like no holes. So, like, there can't be a particular thing that an opposing team in the postseason can pinpoint as a glaring weakness to take you out of a game in a series. That is what top 10 is reserved for. You couldn't just take Shaq out of a game in his prime. Too big, too fat, too strong, too big, too powerful. You couldn't do it. Same thing with the rest of these elite top 10 players. There really was no hole. I mean, like Magic Johnson was not necessarily considered to be a great shooter, but when it came down to it in playoff games, when it mattered most in high leverage moments, suddenly, as you said, he was making jumpers,
Right.
ugly form and all.
Yep.
You just can't be able to take somebody out of it. And yeah, I mean, basketball discriminates against height and physicality. It just is what it is. The rim is 10 feet tall. The taller you are, and the more skilled you are, given your height, is going to determine to some degree how effective you can be as an individual player. And as great and skilled and as great and as skilled as Steph is, there are some physical aspects of defensive basketball that you can apply to him given his size that can allow you to limit his effectiveness. if you have the personnel to do so. And I don't think you can put somebody in the top 10 if you can just outright limit them that way. I remember when the Portland Trailblazers, way back in the year 2000, were playing the Lakers in the Western Conference Finals. And they tried to say that Ruben Patterson was the Kobe stopper, and Ruben Patterson was a bigger dude. He's like, what, 6'7", 6'8", something like this. He was a bigger guy.
Mhm.
Kobe's like 6'6". Kobe was dropping 40 on him. And it's like, you can't just stop those guys like that. It's not possible. Like, the
Right.
only way that you can really stop them is if they're having a bad night and they stop themselves. But there's no stopper. As much as I don't like LeBron, anytime that they try to say, hey, you're the LeBron guy, LeBron was like, whatever, I'm going to beat you. Like, LeBron did his thing. He still got his 38-8 in those games, regardless of whether you thought you had somebody on the roster who could slow that down. And it's the same way with everybody else that I put in the top 10. So for me, along those lines, I can't see that when it comes to Steph. It just is what it is. But like I said, there's no slouch against being someone who's top 15 or top 20. And, to be honest, these are just goofy media narratives
Of course.
where they throw in things like impact and the way the game is played today. Steph gets put into this top 10 range because NBA basketball today is played from the 3-point line and out. So because he is the most proficient at that ever, he's put into that category because of the way the game is played. But in a vacuum, when we're talking holistically about playing basketball, um, if you can limit somebody, it doesn't matter the way the game is played and what their impact is. I don't see how somebody can be top 10 when you can just take them out of a game in a playoff series. Um, so that's kind of my 2 cents on it. I'm willing to go so far as to say top 15, and that's the threshold for me when it comes to including impact. And of course, with his career achievement, hard to argue. 4 championships is 4 championships. 2 MVPs is 2 MVPs. Most threes that he ever, most threes made ever. All that good stuff is fine. But when the rubber meets the road, and it's the high leverage moments in the playoffs, you also have to be infallible there in order to be top 10. And historically, up until 2022, he wasn't infallible in those moments. So I just can't put him in the top 10. So yeah, I agree with T Mac just for different reasons, different criteria.
Yeah, well said. And man, yeah, man, Steph could even before, like, he could have really played in any era, honestly. So, and that's a great compliment to any basketball player. So, yeah, man. Even before the 3-point ball was invented like that, I mean, his shooting is just superb, bro. The guy's amazing. So, but you still got to show up big in big moments. And I've watched enough Steph Curry. I'm not going to be in revisionist history. I've seen enough of him wilter to know that, yeah, he's awesome, but there's still a little umph that I feel that he's missing. And whatever that umph is the reason why he's not in my top 10. So, yeah,
Yeah,
man.
yeah,
Hey, man. Best of luck,
yeah,
Steph.
yeah. Shouts out to T Mac and shouts out to Steph. Yeah, Steph is an all-time great, phenomenal player, but top 10 all time is what I call the room within the room.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't be in the room within the room when there's holes in your resume like that, in my opinion. So,
Agreed.
it is what it is.